In many non-Western societies, people's lives are organized by and around religion and ritual. Religion isn't a separate sphere of life, practiced only by some people on some days of the week. It's part of everything. Ritual brings people together and organizes the sharing of food and labor. The proper performance of ritual is considered to be essential to keep the world in balance. If the rains don't come or the corn doesn't grow, this might be an indication that rituals weren't being done properly. So ritual is often an important organizing principle in these societies. In this lecture, you'll see first how archaeologists can detect evidence for ritual, and second, how archaeologist Harry Schaefer, who excavated the Nan Ranch ruin, reconstructed some aspects of Mimbres belief systems, or cosmology. Flying Fish Village was a small but very well-preserved site we excavated in the eastern Mimbres area. Because it was so well-preserved, the architecture was especially interesting to excavate. But one crew was frustrated. They kept digging layer after careful layer without finding much. They thought they were digging outside the room and wanted to move. But then they started to find strangely colored dirt and lots of white powder. They had been digging in this colorful room, buried more deeply than the others. Pueblo rituals today often involve colors associated with the four cardinal directions. And that's what we see here. Red ochre along the southern wall, blue in the northeast corner, yellow to the west, and white in many spots. The blue had been ground into a metate, and in the corner was a badger skull, also covered with blue. In the Mimbres Valley, we see other evidence of ritual at two of the largest sites, Galaz and Old Town. This great kiva at Old Town was built and used during the late Pit House period, and sometime in the early 10th century, it was deliberately burned and collapsed. Decades, or possibly a century later, people dug through the fill that had accumulated in the great kiva and buried a man, probably a ritual leader, so that his body touched the ancient floor. If the way he was treated in death says something about his life, then this man was special not because he had greater wealth than others, but because of his knowledge and practice of ritual. Cosmology is the way people understand and explain the world, including the place of ourselves and other beings in the world, how it came to be, how it works, and maybe also what we need to do, the rituals we need to perform to keep it going. Dr. Harry Schaefer's reconstruction of Mimbres cosmology is based on various lines of evidence, including Mimbres artifacts and architecture, what we know about cosmology in Mesoamerica, where we have written texts, and the beliefs and traditional histories of today's Pueblo peoples. We know there were connections between the Mimbres region and Mesoamerica because we find Mesoamerican artifacts, such as these copper bells, in Mimbres sites. Mimbres bowls also depict Mesoamerican style images. The smoking figure in the upper left is from the site of Casas Grandes in Chihuahua. The figure on the Mimbres bowl in the lower right is also smoking. It looks very much like the figurine. The painting is from a Mimbres bowl, and it probably refers to a Mayan story in which two twins descended into the underworld, entered into a conflict with a deity who resided there, and were sacrificed. Eventually, they were reborn to the surface world, and they're known as the Hero Twins. Schaefer's reconstruction of Mimbres cosmology has three parts. The first, and the most complex, in his words, is that people of the Mimbres region saw themselves as dwelling in a world of multiple layers beneath a bowl sky dome, end quote. This layered universe rotates with the rising and setting sun. The house is a metaphor for this layered universe. The middle world was where people dwelled in everyday life. A ladder connected the middle world to the upper world, possibly in the same way as the axis mundi known from Mesoamerican cosmology. Burials, often under the floors of rooms, were part of the underworld. And, especially in the older, more centrally placed rooms, square, slab-lined ash boxes beside the hearths and ceremonial features known as sipapus represented portals into the underworld. The idea of emergence from the underworld is often symbolized by the ancestors' houses, dug into the earth. These are what archaeologists call pit houses. Shows what might be an emergence scene. And designs such as this one, that depict a quadruped with a human face in rotational symmetry, may also be depicting emergence and transformation. The second part of Schaeffer's theory is called dwelling with the ancestors. Through proper burial, the dead were transformed into ancestral spirits, and they continued to participate in the community, especially in rituals. These are kachina dancers, important in many rituals and known from contemporary pueblos. We also see masked figures depicted on Mimbres bowls. These may have been precursors to the kachina religion, which doesn't appear in the Southwest until, at the earliest, the late 13th century. In many classic Mimbres villages, room blocks were built accretionally, and the first built rooms, which became the core of the room block, often became special places. The colorful room at Flying Fish Village was a core room, and in some cases, people buried their dead under the floors of core rooms, so they were literally dwelling with the ancestors. This map shows part of the Galaz ruin, and it shows many burials. These are the lines with dots that indicate the orientation of the heads. You can see that some rooms have far more burials than others. In many cases, the bodies were tightly bundled, and a bowl was placed on their head. And very often, these bowls had kill holes, which we talked about in the lecture on Mimbres pottery. Finally, the third part of the cosmology is connecting with the watery world. People recognize the importance of water for their lives and their crops. There are many bowls that depict water creatures. There are other vessels that show the emergence of people from a watery world. Tlaloc is an Aztec deity associated with rain, lightning, and fertility. He's recognized by his goggle eyes. This rock art panel near the Nan Ranch ruin shows a Tlaloc-like figure, although it dates to far earlier than the Aztec. And we see the same kind of goggle eyes on some Mimbres bowls. To conclude, we can't be sure that Mimbres cosmology was exactly the way Dr. Schaeffer describes it. But what's important about his work is both that he gives us insights into what it might have been like to live in classic Mimbres societies, and he provides evidence to support his interpretations.